Good morning and good evening, everyone. We are Group 4 and we are presenting on COVID-19 and its effects on institutions and students. So moving forward, what do you see? Is it a 6 or is it a 9? Sometimes what matters is the perspective. Do you see things only as a 6 that is in front of you, or are you also able to see the hidden 9? The reason why we decided to explore the effect on institutions as well is because we are trying to find that hidden 9. So, can universities really be blamed for not being able to decrease tuition during the pandemic? In March 2020, University of Toronto provided $3 million to support its students in the time of crisis. University of Tokyo is also offering handouts up to 50,000 yen to students who lost their part-time jobs or are going through financial hardships. These are just one or two of the many universities that are doing the same. As per a report, it is stated that Japan could lose up to $9.2 billion if they were required to refund tuition fees, and some may even have to see closure. Similarly, the Canadian university industry is projected to decline by 1.4% in the year 2020 due to tuition refunds and enrollment rates. So let's do a little bit of math. The table that is listed in front of you has total expenditure, total revenue, net income, and income earned through tuition, admission, or examination fees for 3 Canadian universities and 3 Japanese universities. These numbers have been extracted from the financial reports posted by these universities on their websites for the year 2019-2020. As you can see, the net income is not even close to covering 50% of the 50% of the income that is earned through tuition, admission, or examination fees. And having studied these reports personally, I can also say that sometimes it doesn't matter how much profit a university makes, it is still not enough for them to be able to decrease the tuition for their students, especially during the pandemic. So, are we stuck in a loop? Universities are dependent on student revenues to sustain themselves, and students in turn are dependent on universities for their education and financial aid, especially during these tough times. And this brings us to our first reflection question, which is, why does the loop exist? Cannot countries adopt the same policies as Scandinavian countries that offer free education? Keep thinking as I now pass on the mic to my teammate Soya.
Because of the pandemic, the life of students has dramatically changed. What surprised me the most was that the rate of dropouts increased in both in Canada and Japan. In Japan, many students decided to drop out from university. According to a survey, during a 4-month period, over 11,000 students dropped out before getting their degrees. This rate is virtually identical to last year. A similar tendency took place in Canada as well. NEET rates for young Canadians rose sharply from March to April. Look at the graph. Students aged 15 to 19 stopped attending classes because of school closure in the beginning of the pandemic. As you can see, the arrow is much steeper than others. Speaking of which, the way we attend classes has also changed. Although some people insist that online classes have better points in terms of efficiency, flexibility, and time saving, many students have been suffering from this change. A survey points out that a lot of students have been in depression, partly because they can't meet up with their friends at school. Besides that, this change has widened the gap between the rich and the poor. In Quebec, for instance, organizations estimate that more than 4,700 households do not have high-speed internet connections, which would cause thousands of young students to be deprived of educational opportunities. Another example is the prevalence of online classes in Japan. While most universities started online courses in May, the University of Tokyo introduced online lectures from April 3rd, but students didn't like it. In fact, 70% of them complained that online learning fell short of their expectations. So our next question is, are online classes really that bad? Our teammate Janelle will answer this question.
Hello, I'm Janelle, and I'm going to compare the differences between online and in-person classes. So I interviewed students from both Canadian and Japanese universities to see what they were saying. The best thing about online classes was that students did not have to get ready in the morning. Then students also mentioned that they don't have to drive long distances or have to go out in extreme weather conditions just to go to class, as well as they're able to save money on parking. The disadvantages of the online classes is that it's harder to stay motivated and on track since things moved online. Also, programs such as the medical ones are a little harder to have online as it requires more in-person training. For an example, a nursing student from the University of Calgary said, as a nursing student, it was impossible for me to do everything online. So she is required to practice clinical skills during labs before performing these skills during her hospital practicum. Advantages of in-class learning is that it's much easier to learn in class because there is no distractions. And the disadvantages for online learning is that there's limited access to resources such as the library, as well as having an impact on mental health due to the isolation from friends and professors. Yeah, so is online learning here to stay? In the future, when the pandemic is over, there'll most likely be a choice for students based on their program to take classes online or in person. Programs such as nursing may be able to do some classes online, but there should be more in-person labs so they'll be more confident to perform the clinical skills. However, art programs such as history would be all right to have completely online if the student were to choose that route. And thank you. Now I'm going to pass over the next part of the presentation to Yumika.
After the pandemic, how will higher education change? Recently, societies are getting digitized. For example, many countries introduced cashless, engineers invented autonomous cars, and many workers start to work at their home. So education is also changing or introducing more digital. As you know, online classes are hard at some points, especially for freshmen like me. We can make new friends, it's very lonely and boring. But remote learning will be normal in the future because it's easy to take. Most famous universities such as Harvard, University of British Columbia, and University of Tokyo all use online during pandemic. Given students are studying their university completely online without ever visiting the campus, do you think the quality of education that they are receiving is still the same as in-person classes? As we move towards a system of online learning, there is a chance that the credibility of the quality of education provided by the universities might also start to decline. And there's another change of higher education, such as many students drop out of their universities, such as Soya said before. So it's difficult to manage universities. Many students drop out of the universities because they are not satisfied with online classes and it's difficult to pay expensive tuition fees. The institutions are also affected by the COVID. Small-scale universities are already in financial danger and considering closing their universities. For example, the University of Akron in the US is already closed 6 colleges. So what does the future look like for students and universities? Will this time that we are in now allow us to self-reflect and think whether college is really worth it? Now that countries are starting to vaccinate the population, until most people have immunity, one could only assume to rely on online classes. In other words, this is the chance to change the higher education style. Thank you for listening to us, and we welcome any questions that you may have. These are works cited.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You've made me also wonder if there's going to be a future for the university and what it might look like. Earlier in your presentation, you presented a slide that showed that 15 to 19-year-olds or 15 were experiencing difficulties with online education. That age group means that it covers both high school as well as university. I'm wondering how you felt as university students being in an online learning situation when you knew that certainly in Canada, the high school students were able to meet face to face.
I have been feeling in depression because of the pandemic. I was supposed to go to US and study abroad, but it got canceled. So that gave me like a tough time. But I think the situation in Canada is much tougher than in Japan. The reason why the rate rose sharply is because students had to work because they had to support their family, which is unusual in Japan.
Thank you for that information. My question was, is it fair for students at university to be in online classes when students in high schools are able to meet face to face?
I think that is not fair because as college student, we also pay tuition fees, but we are not allowed to commute to school, which seems to me totally unfair. But given the situation considered, I think we should consider about it like more.
So just to add on to his answer, there's another perspective that I would want to bring in point, which is in high schools, students usually sit in the same class, but in college, you have to always move in between spaces and you meet a lot of different students in a lot of different classes, which means that your social bubble is very big. I would say the probability that you might transfer the COVID particles or the sickness to other person increases by a very significant percentage as compared to students who are in high school because they stay in the same seat every single day.
And that's actually a wonderful segue. Princess Takamado was mentioning that in her introduction, how in her hallways at Cambridge, she would meet different students and it created a really important exchange of perspectives. So students, what did you hear in your group? Did you hear a difference in Canada and Japan in terms of quality and credibility in your education systems?
I can answer this one because last year I was actually studying abroad at Tenry University during when the pandemic started. Yeah, so at first, it was very normal in class, and then all of a sudden things moved online, and so it kind of felt that my study abroad experience was kind of taken away from me. Yeah, so in a way, it was like, oh, this is not fair, but eventually it worked out where my Japanese professor was able to get permission to have classes back in class. So it worked out.